Okay, now let's talk about different approaches to prevent food spoilage. So we have been talking about all this different manipulating different environment that can stop the spoilage of different bacteria. So for example, this removal of microorganisms what we have talked about, we can avoid of microbial contamination during the food processing industry, during the handling of the food, and we have to be a little bit more careful about food making or for cooking and all these purposes. We need to rinse our hand really carefully and need to serve this food without any kind of chance of contamination. So we have to keep in mind that removal of microorganisms is the best part of doing all this, because it's the most least expensive and it's a really hygienic one. And now if we have the contamination in food, then you have the lower temperature for refrigerant. For our normal home purposes we can use this. Then you can use high temperature. We can also use this, which we call the food blanching, and we use this. What we are doing, we are actually cooking foods. By cooking those foods, we are inactivating the microorganisms growth by heating them in higher temperature. Normally when we are cooking food, we are going sometimes over 100 degrees Celsius. So this over 100 degrees Celsius temperature for a long time can kill all those microorganisms that is present. So cooking food is really important. So don't eat any uncooked food, especially those foods which are perishable. Don't eat perishable food uncooked type. Okay. So, and we have the reduced water availability. How can we do a reduced water availability? By use of different salt contents. Use of different salt contents to drive water away from bacterial, so drive water away from food contents. We can use different halophilic environment, but there are some of those bacteria which can you can really grow in this high sugar and salt content. For example, okay, they are called halophiles. So use sugar to make a really concentration of sugar content, thus reducing the water activity or availability for the microorganisms to grow. For example, in cherry and all these different kinds of fruit, we can use this high sugar content like that. And we can have the different chemical based preservation. But one thing you should know about this chemical based preservation, that they are also chemicals. What we are using is to protect against ourselves against chemical, we are using chemicals. So this is an oxymoronic type, but these chemicals have to be safe for us, safe for our health. If we do not use a safe chemicals or safety chemical for our food preservation, that those chemicals we use to make us chemical we use to as our friend can be our foe after some time. So we have to use those chemicals which are called generally recognized as safe. We call them GRAS. So generally recognized as safe via the different chemical control boards. So if we use those chemicals, that's fine, that's safe. Sometimes there are different organic compounds, the nitrites, the sulfur dioxides, because sulfur dioxide, nitrites and all these things can interfere with the metabolism of microorganisms, that can prevent those microorganisms to grow in the particular environment. And we can use the physical use of this radiation schemes, ionizing radiation like gamma radiation, and non-ionizing radiation like UV radiation, to kill all the microorganisms that are present in bacterial cell that are present in food. So by use of this, we can make this sterile. You can make the food sterile, and but this is not the end of the sterility of the food. So if we make the food sterile, you need to pack those food in such an environment that do not generally contaminate the sterile food again. So that's another important thing to keep in your mind. And we have microbial product based inhibition. So you can use different product, for example addition of substances such as bacteriocins. Bacteriocins are such as some proteins which can make holes in the bacterial cell, which can make holes, and thus which can kill bacterial cells in minutes. We can use this different bacterial induced materials. So bacteriocins are actually produced by other bacteria cells. I can use these bacteriocins to prevent foods. We can use antibiotic to prevent some of those foods, but normally antibiotics are not used as food preservation, because antibiotics have several bad effects in our health too, adverse effect too. That's why I do not use these other kinds of antibacterial agents, but we can use them for some of those foods to be sterilized, to get rid of these microorganisms. And we can talk about the food preservation. Here are the different chemical based preservation. We have talked about this chemical based preservation. If we want to use chemicals to prevent our chemical spoilage of food, we need to use those chemicals which are generally recognized as safe. So in this type of food, we have normally these are the actually adequate different food preservatives which are used, which is actually recognized as safe. These are benzoic acid. We can use sorbic acid, we can use propionic acid. So we can use this propionic acid for different breads, cakes, some cheeses and all this. So this bread, cake, cheeses, all these fermented products to go against the molds. We can also use sorbic acid or sorbates against these molds. We can use the sorbate and propionates against this kind of molds. Actually, these hard cheese, these syrups, salad, jellies, cakes, breads, and all these things. If we want to go against yeasts and molds, we can use benzoic acid, because the benzoic acid is really strong inhibitor of antimicrobial growth, but they can inhibit the growth of yeast and molds, but not the bacteria. Parabens or benzoic acids can be used for different fruits, for example, to prevent the yeast preservation, yeast contamination, because yeast generally contaminate different fruits. In this case, you can prevent this for pickle, apple cider, soft drinks, tomato ketchup, and all these things. And we can use sulfur dioxide, which is a really dangerous for preventing all. So we can use sulfur dioxide for almost eradicating almost every microorganisms from a fruit source, like molasses, like wine, lemon, and other food recognized as this. So we can use the sulfur dioxide or sulfides against a whole lot of microorganisms. We can use sodium, we can use for example methyl formate and all these different things, nitrous compounds. But the sulfur dioxide and nitrous compounds are the most versatile of them all. They can kill bacteria as well as yeasts and molds. But benzoic acid can kill yeast, and the sorbic acid and propionic acid kills molds. And we can use radiation. So this is a physical technique to get rid of bacteria, to make our food sterile. This is the radiation process. We can use this ultraviolet radiation, which is non-ionizing radiation. We can use this for surfaces of food handling equipments. For example, if we have to sterile the food handling equipment without any bacteria, we can use this ultraviolet radiation, which does not penetrate the food, but it can clean up the surface area of the food. So if the food has the surface area, if you use UV ray, so the UV ray can strike away from the food a surface area that can cleave the food from the outer surface. So it cannot enter, that's why it cannot make the food whole safe. So that's why you need to use another set of radiation. We can use gamma radiation. If you use gamma radiation, that can go through these food barriers and inside of the food, and by doing this, it can make our food really safer for us to eat. Okay, so we call them normally redapartization. So what is redapartization? It is the use of ionizing radiation, for example the gamma radiation, to extend the shelf life. Normally what we are doing in case of meat, in case of seafoods like a sardine, like shellfish, like this, all different types of food and fruits and vegetables also can be prevented using this redapartization, which kills microorganisms in moist foods by producing peroxides from water. As we know, water can be converted into peroxides. So peroxides, when it's divided, it will form water. If we do water and oxygen, so if we have water, we release some of the oxygen, the water can be transferred into peroxide if we add oxygen molecule to it. So what this redapartization is doing in case of this UV this ionizing, that means the gamma radiation. The gamma radiation makes a help or trigger to make a form of hydrogen peroxide from the water, using of water. By making this hydrogen peroxide is really toxic material for bacterial cells, and they can be a very dangerous material for bacteria. They can they can prevent the bacterial cells to grow in normal environments. That's why it's really important for us to use this redapartization. And now we can do against the microbial product based inhibition. We have talked about the bacteriocins, which are the bacterial protein active against related species. So we have some species which secretes the bacteriocin, which can prevent the other species to grow. We can use this because these are naturals. We can use them for different purposes, for natural uses. So they are not that much harmful as the other chemical agents, but we can use them. Some forms pores in plasma membranes, as I have told before, acts as porins, and by doing this it will disturb the osmolarity of bacterial cells. So whenever something makes a hole in a bacterial cell, that's why the bacterial cell ions will goes out and down without any without the regulation of a transport system in the bacterial cell. That will leads to formation of different osmolarity changes, and that will kill this bacterial cell in some times, and in a few time later. Okay, the example is a niacin, which is a low acid food of inactivative Clostridium botulinum during the canning process. So the Clostridium botulinum is really dangerous bacteria which called the toxin, which release a toxin which is called the botulinum toxin. This is a potent neurotoxin, so it's a very small percentage of dose of this toxin can kill a whole person. So it's a really devastating toxin which will paralyze our nervous system in minutes. So we can prevent this Clostridium botulinum toxin by using this niacin. If we use this niacin, or sometimes we call it niacin, which is a really low acid, which can be found in really low acidic food, we can use this niacin, which is a bacteriocin. We can use this bacteriocin in low acid fruits. For example, tomato ketchup. We can use it in wines and beers sometimes to prevent the growth of toxin Clostridium botulinum and to prevent the formation of botulinum toxin in our food. In our canning industries, we can use this niacin and all these different proteins. Okay, now let's talk about the foodborne illness. So why the foodborne illness can take a toll? Because if the bacteria and microorganisms like molds and yeast can grow in food in uncontrolled fashion, they can trigger different diseases. They can form different diseases. They can have infection. They can invade our tissues after the eating of the food, and they can form different diseases by the releasing of different toxins. For example, we have talked about the botulinum toxin. So they are normally in different types of intoxications. Normally toxins are produced by Bacillus cereus, Streptococcus aureus, Clostridium botulinum, Staphylococcus food poisoning also there, and Clostridium perfringens also make our food really bad and smelly and really ropey and bad color. And so how we can know a food is actually distorted? By looking at the characteristics of the food, the color of the food, the smell of the food, and the texture of the food. So if any one of these three things is changed a little bit, if the color is getting worse, for example a banana, if it is getting ripened and getting hampered by bacteria, the banana color is changed from yellow towards the brown and finally black. And if you look at other examples like curd, like milk, when the milk is getting hampered by the bacterial attack, that makes a solid and semi-solid state from the liquid state. So this texture is also important part, color is an important part, and also the obviously order. When the egg is getting hampered by the bacteria, it will produce the obnoxious odor, which tells us that and the food is not in its proper form. And then finally we discard the food and get rid of those foods, those microbial attacked foods, and finally that will make us safety. But not only that makes safety for us, because contamination can be possible. So after the food discarding, we have to wash our hands really carefully. So all these food based diseases are caused by the lack of unhygienic concepts. So you have to be really hygienic about your food preservation, food production purposes in your home. So what you can do, we can prevent the growth of the Staphylococcus botulinum toxin and this Clostridium toxin and the Bacillus cereus toxin. So how can we detect foodborne pathogens in our food? By finally, when the food is distorting in its colors, texture, and the odor, we can finally find that we can guess the food is in attack of different bacteria. So how can we find the foodborne pathogens? To detect the foodborne pathogens, we have different methods. We have direct culture techniques, but the direct techniques are hard because we have to work with some of those dangerous bacteria which can cause different diseases. So that can also be possible. But direct thing can also gives us a clue of whether the bacteria are live or not, and what is the amount of bacteria that present in a particular time. So if culture techniques, for example, this is really too slow, for example. So if you have a food poisoning, we need to really track down the cause, and we need to go limited further steps to prevent it. But the culture techniques will take a long time to do that. So but this is really definitely a definite technique to do that. But we have immunological techniques with different very sensitive immunological techniques. We have now different assays and immunological assays that helps us determining the foodborne illness and foodborne microorganisms and the content of microorganisms that is present in the food. And we have also different molecular techniques. We can use the probes, that means the small DNA, single-stranded DNA molecules, sometimes RNA molecules. We can use to determine whether the food is contaminated by the genetic content of any kind of microorganism. So if we find genetic content of different microorganisms in food, then you can finally say that the food is getting hijacked by those microorganisms. Okay. So this is an example of a graph. If we look at this x-axis, we have a cell number, and what is the OD, optical density. In normal cases of our day-to-day life in laboratories, optical density means the formation of the cloud of cells. So we have lots of cells dividing all the time. We have a larger optical density. We have a lower cell count, we have lower optical density. So when the cell rises, the cell count is rising, the optical density we found higher. So we can see the comparison on a PCR, which is a molecular based technique to determine a detection of salmonella in this case. Okay, what we can look at them when we have the PCR positive reactions, we have to go through the time. So we have the cell number is increasing over time, and also the OD is increasing over time. So by measuring the OD after the PCR technique, which will amplify the amount of DNA molecule that we found in foodborne illness. So in food we can find this DNA. We need to run PCR or polymerase chain reaction. Sometimes we need to run the RT-PCR or reverse transcriptase PCR, because those in case of viruses, because viruses sometimes have the RNA molecules. To go through the RNA molecules, we need to make a RT-PCR to produce lots of DNA molecules from that RNA molecules. For whenever we produce the DNA molecules, we run polymerase chain reaction. By this reaction we can amplify the same types of DNA. By amplifying that, we can measure the OD. By measuring the OD, we can determine whether the food is safe to eat or not, and what much amount of salmonella can attack the food, and what is the content of it. And this is another thing to actually help to use this UV radiation to prevent the damage of our food. So the nucleic acid can be detected even when plaque forming ability is lost. Normally the plaque forming ability is for viruses is going on. So what we can have, we have different viruses going on. We have different content of viruses. This is the content or the amount of viruses going on. So if we can take about the ultraviolet doses, we can go through the ultraviolet doses, different amount of ultraviolet doses. After some time, what we can find this level of the viral particle is actually falling down. If we take a log value and draw this, you can find this ultimately almost a straight line to actually rapid fall of in the content of viral particles. That tells us the ultraviolet radiation is really effective against this kind of infections. And how can you get the amount of the virus particles, virus RNA particles, virus DNA particles? Well, with the help of this RT-PCR or reverse transcriptase PCR. We run reverse transcriptase PCR to make DNA particles from the RNA particles which we find in food, and after having those DNA particles, we can run this, and after running it, after doing it with ultraviolet doses, we can track down the concentration of these DNA particles in food. And foodborne illness is actually tightly controlled by these two organizations. One is PulseNet, one is the FoodNet. PulseNet, what is actually doing? It is actually established by CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and they uses gel electrophoresis under carefully controlled manner to detect the DNA pattern of each biological pathogen. When you make the DNA pattern and sequence the DNA and know the DNA structure of the biological pathogen, we can go against them with the help of molecular biological techniques or the biotechnological methods. Okay, and that will be really rapid and really helpful for us to detect the actual pathogen causing agents and to prevent their growth and development. And in other words, the FoodNet, in case of the FoodNet, what they are doing, FoodNets are FoodNet individuals or FoodNet associates are actually doing this surveillance network used for follow 9 major foodborne illness. So mostly we have seen the 9 major foodborne illness. The cholera is one of them, typhoid is one of them, and this is among these major foodborne illnesses that enables so this is not food. Sorry, I've made a mistake. This cholera and typhoid is a waterborne illness. This also water is a part of food, so it's a waterborne illness. Okay, so this 9 major foodborne illness, for example, the salmonella toxication, the streptococcus poisoning, the staphylococcus aureus poisoning, and the botulinum poisoning. So these are among those 9 major foodborne illness. So that enables public health officials to rapidly trace and course the cause of the infection and in days rather than weeks. So they are really rapidly doing their jobs. They can do the job and where the disease comes from and how they can prevent the disease, because if the disease spreads via the food, that will be really dangerous, and that can be spread from one place to another place, and that can really form a pandemic after some time. That's really important. So in case of PulseNet, what they're doing, they can make a link of pathogens associated with diseases. So they can making link with pathogens and diseases. But the FoodNet officials are doing and tracing the causative agents of diseases and pathogens. So this is these are the actual works, and they are tracked down these diseases. They are preventing their diseases, and the PulseNet is actually acquiring the information about that pathogen which caused the diseases. So this is the different setup which is placed to actually go against the foodborne illnesses and to fight against the foodborne diseases. Okay, now now let's talk about the fermented foods. We have been discussing about the food and foodborne infections and different microorganisms and their roles in causing foodborne diseases. But these fermented foods, in case of production of these fermented foods, the most important part is played by different microorganisms. So that thing which I concluded in very first slide of my discussion is that we have microorganisms, and we can make food. We have this food. So this food can be spoiled by microorganisms, and this food can be produced by microorganisms in different ways, or I can say not produced, by modification. So food can be modified using microorganisms. These modified foods will be very helpful in, sometimes they are very delicious. So you can look at this very delicious background. So it's a cheers up about all these things. So many alcoholic beverages, bread, curd, which is a regular part of our life, and for example, many different food can be produced by the fermentation method. So what is fermentation actually? Let's talk about the chemistry about fermentation for a while. We know what happens when we eat food. When you take food, for example, take glucose. The glucose has to have broken down into small pieces. The broken down into small pieces to yield energy. We yield energy by first round of breakdown is, we call it glycolysis. After glycolysis, it goes through Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle. After the citric acid cycle, it generates some amount of ATP, but lots of energy contained molecule like NADP, NADH and FADH2. This NADH and FADH2 goes through another round of electron passing reactions. We call them the electron transport chain and electron transport system. Through this electron transport system, it produces lots of ATP. That's how energy is made when we have food material in our blood, in our cells. So cells, when do not have any food material, what they will do? They cannot harvest the food for making energy, so the cell will be weak and it will die. So we all need energy, so that means we all need foods to survive, microorganisms and we too. That's why microorganisms eat foods which is meant for us. Actually, we leave food for us, and microorganisms take them because they also need energy. But we don't want them to eat these foods because they are most of the time our enemies, right? So what they'll do all this process like glycolysis, Krebs cycle, electron transport system, and finally they can make ATP. But in all this process, which is called the cellular respiration, we need oxygen to carry on these things, especially this step, especially the step of electron transport chain, which needs the oxygen. Without oxygen, electron transport chain cannot be possible. So in all we need oxygen for our this way of aerobic respiration. We call it the cellular respiration process. And this cellular respiration process, why we call it respiration? Because normally we call it respiration when you take oxygen and you leave carbon dioxide. This is called respiration normally. So when you're talking about cellular respiration, that means the cell will take oxygen, it will produce carbon dioxide and it will release it. It produces carbon dioxide and releases, but it has to take oxygen. But it has to take oxygen because oxygen acts as an electron acceptor, the terminal electron acceptor for the electron transport chain. So that's why it's important. So if we do not have oxygen for a while, consider this, if we do not have oxygen for a while, so oxygen is omitted for a while, example, what will a cell going to do? Well, the cell have another way to produce some of the energy without the presence of oxygen, because it can be happen because in all the places of our body we have millions and trillions of cells, and sometime what can happen when we were in real stress, some of those cells will lack the oxygen, but still it have to produce energy to keep on moving. So it will produce energy using another different way. We call it anaerobic respiration. Like the